The Arizona sun had a way of stretching out the hours, painting the sky in colors so warm they felt alive. For most people, summer meant heat that pressed down heavy and unrelenting. But for Tasha Williams, it meant something else entirely. It meant sitting on her back porch, iced tea in hand, gazing out at the one thing she cherished more than anything she owned, her pool. At 42, she had built her life one decision at a time, carefully and stubbornly. She hadn't inherited money. No husband had signed the mortgage beside her. Every inch of this two-level home in Chandler had been earned with long hours, small sacrifices, and years of quiet determination. The pool especially was her reward, a promise she had once made to herself back in her 20s when she lived in a cramped apartment with nothing but a dream. One day, I'll have my own pool, my own space, my own peace. And now here it was, a slice of paradise in her own backyard. Palm trees swayed gently along the fence line, their long shadows dipping across the clear, still water. The faint smell of chlorine mingled with the sweetness of jasmine she'd planted near the patio. On weekends, she'd roll out a lounge chair, stretch her legs, and let the world fall away. The pool wasn't just water, it was pride, freedom, independence. It was hers. That's why the sight stopped her cold. It was early evening, the sun slipping behind the rooftops when she pushed through the gate after work and felt it before she saw it. Something was wrong. She paused, frowning. The air felt disturbed, unsettled, as if strangers had walked through it only moments before. Then she saw them. Wet footprints. They trailed from the back gate, stamped into the concrete, leading straight toward the pool. Tasha froze, her grocery bag slipping against her hip as she scanned the yard. On her lounge chair sat a half-empty soda can, beads of condensation glistening in the fading light. A beach towel, definitely not hers, lay draped over the fence, still damp, like someone had tossed it there without care. Her chest tightened. She dropped her bag on the counter and hurried outside, her eyes darting across the scene. The water level looked lower than usual, the surface broken with tiny ripples that hadn't yet settled. Her inflatable float was pushed to the deep end. She knew every inch of this pool, every placement of every toy, and this was wrong. Someone had been here. For a long moment, she just stood there, her mind trying to make sense of it. The logical part of her whispered excuses. Maybe it was a worker, maybe the wind knocked things around, but that soda can, that towel, the footprints, they told a story she didn't want to believe. Kids. It had to be kids. Her neighbors' voices echoed in her head, conversations she'd overheard about the relentless heat, about how everyone wished they had a pool. She swallowed, trying to calm the thrum of irritation building in her chest. It wasn't worth spiraling over. Probably some teenagers. Maybe they'd snuck in for a quick dip, thinking no one would notice. But Tasha noticed. She walked over to the lounge chair, picked up the soda can, and stared at the ring of moisture it had left behind. Her jaw tightened. This wasn't just a can. It was a message. Not written, not spoken, but loud enough. Your home doesn't matter. Your rules don't matter. We can take what we want. She set the can down harder than she meant to, the hollow clang breaking the silence. For the first time since buying the house, her sanctuary didn't feel safe. The backyard that once calmed her now prickled her skin with unease. She locked the gate that night with deliberate care, tugging twice to make sure it held. But even then, as she lay in bed listening to the hum of her Sealy young fan, she couldn't shake the thought. If they got away with it once, what would stop them from coming back? The pool glistened under the moonlight that night, a jewel in the desert heat. But Tasha wasn't looking at it with pride anymore. She was looking at it with the first flicker of fear. And fear, she would soon learn, had a way of turning into something much sharper. The heat was already pressing down by mid-morning, the kind of desert sun that made the pavement shimmer and the air feel heavy. Tasha sat at her kitchen table, staring into her coffee without tasting it. She had tried to shake off the unease from the night before, but it lingered in the corners of her mind like a shadow that wouldn't leave. The footprints, the soda can, the towel, proof that her sanctuary wasn't hers alone anymore. She told herself it was a one-time thing, a dare maybe, kids sneaking into a pool on a hot day. They'd had their fun, and now it would be over. But as the days passed, that hope began to feel thin. She found herself glancing out the back window more often, checking the gate, double-checking the lock. Her peace had been chipped, one small crack at a time. Then it happened again. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind where the whole neighborhood seemed to spill into the streets. Cars in driveways, sprinklers hissing, dogs barking. Tasha was inside, folding laundry in the living room when she heard it. At first, she thought it was the pool filter kicking on, but then, splashes, followed by laughter. Her body went rigid. She set the laundry down, heart thudding in her chest. She moved quietly toward the sliding glass door, pulled the curtain just enough to see, and what she saw made her blood run hot. A teenage boy was in her pool, swimming like he owned it, his arms cutting across the water with easy strokes. On the edge sat a girl, maybe his sister, her feet dipping lazily in the water. Their voices carried through the yard, carefree, unbothered, as if they belonged there. Tasha yanked the door open. "Excuse me?" The sound cracked across the yard. Both kids froze. The boy stumbled toward the edge of the pool, water dripping from his hair and shoulders. His face turned pale. The girl scrambled to her feet, eyes wide. I thought you wouldn't mind," the boy stammered, his voice shaking. "You didn't even ask," Tasha snapped. She pointed toward the gate. "Who are you?" The girl's eyes dropped to the ground. We live nearby," she mumbled. They didn't wait for more. Grabbing their towels, they bolted, slipping through the gate like shadows caught in the act. Tasha stood there, fury rising in her chest, the water in her pool still rippling from where he'd jumped out. Her hands trembled as she locked the gate again, the metal clinking too loud in her ears. She wanted to believe that would be the end of it, but deep down she knew better. The brazen way they had walked in, the casual assumption that her space was theirs, it wasn't just childish mischief, it was entitlement. The next day, she did what any reasonable person would do. She marched down the street and knocked on the kids' door. She expected their parents would be horrified, embarrassed, ready to apologize. Instead, she got the opposite. The boy's mother opened the door, arms crossed, her expression somewhere between boredom and irritation. Tasha explained what had happened, her voice firm but polite. The woman smirked, shaking her head. "Oh, relax. They're just kids. It's hot out. What's the problem?" Tasha blinked. For a moment, she couldn't even find words. "The problem," she said slowly, carefully, "is that this is my property, my home, my pool, and I didn't invite anyone to use it." Behind the woman, the father appeared, a man in his 50s with grease-stained hands and a scowl. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. "You're overreacting," he said flatly. "Overreacting." The words sliced deeper than she expected, as if her boundaries, her hard work, her space meant nothing, as if the only one in the wrong was her for daring to care. She stood there for another moment, her jaw clenched, her chest tight with anger she had to swallow down. Finally, she forced a stiff smile. "Understood," she said, though every word tasted bitter. Then she turned and walked away. That night, she sat at her kitchen table again, scrolling through her phone, her eyes darting to the window every few minutes. The pool glistened under the porch light, mocking her. She had done everything right, locked the gate, kept it clean, asked politely, and still, they brushed her off like she was the problem. Her peace was gone, and for the first time, she realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. If she didn't stand her ground, this would only get worse. The cracks in her sanctuary were spreading, and she knew it was only a matter of time before it broke wide open. The desert heat had a way of making time feel slow, as if the hours dragged themselves across the day. But on that Saturday, time rushed, tumbling forward in a blur of disbelief that Tasha Williams would never forget. She had been out most of the morning, running errands, groceries, a stop at the hardware store, nothing unusual. When she pulled into her driveway, she noticed the noise first, a low thrum, like music carried on the wind, then laughter, not one voice, not two, but many, the kind of laughter that came from a crowd. Her chest tightened. She parked the car and cut the engine. The music grew louder now, thumping with bass, spilling over the fence line from her backyard. She froze, hands still on the steering wheel, her pulse quickening. No, it couldn't be, but it was. When she walked through the side gate, grocery bag still in hand, the sight hit her like a slap across the face. Her backyard, her sanctuary, was gone. There were at least 20 people crammed into the space, neighbors she barely knew, their kids, their friends. Half a dozen teenagers splashed in her pool, shrieking as they tossed a ball back and forth. Adults lounged in her chairs, sipping from plastic cups, plates of food balanced on their laps. Someone had dragged her speaker system outside, blasting music so loud the water trembled with each beat. And there, standing knee-deep in her pool, with sunglasses perched on her head, was Sandra, the woman from down the street. She caught sight of Tasha and waved casually, like this was normal, like she belonged there. "Hey Tasha, hope you don't mind. We thought we'd cool off. It's such a scorcher today." Tasha's grocery bag slipped from her hand, tumbling onto the concrete with a dull thud. Apples rolled across the ground, forgotten. Her mouth went dry, fury and disbelief tangling in her chest until she couldn't speak. "Mind?" she finally managed, her voice sharp, cutting through the noise. "You're in my pool, all of you, what is this?" The music faltered as someone scrambled to turn it down. A few people glanced her way, sheepish, but others, most, didn't even move. A man with a beer in hand smirked, muttering under his breath, "It's just a pool." Sandra pushed her sunglasses up, her smile infuriatingly calm. "Don't be dramatic, it's just neighbors having fun. You should join us." That was it, the final straw. "Get out," Tasha snapped, her voice trembling. Not from weakness, but from the sheer force of everything she was holding back. "All of you, out of my yard, now." The pool erupted in awkward silence. A few teens climbed out, dripping water onto the deck, eyes downcast. But others lingered. One boy rolled his eyes and muttered something about uptight homeowners. Sandra crossed her arms, her smile gone. "Tasha, you're making a scene." "A scene?" Tasha's laugh came out bitter, hollow. "You broke into my home, used my property and threw a party in my backyard, and I'm the one making a scene?" The fury in her voice finally pushed them into motion. One by one, reluctantly, they began to gather their things, cups abandoned, towels snatched, voices muttering about how ridiculous she was being. Sandra was the last to climb out, her tone sharp as she passed by. "You know, people would like you more if you weren't so selfish." Selfish. The word seared like a brand. Tasha didn't move until the gate finally clicked shut behind the last one. Only then did her knees give way, and she sank onto the nearest chair, staring at the mess they had left behind. Wet footprints everywhere, snack wrappers floating on the water, music still buzzing faintly in her ears. Her hands trembled as she pressed them to her face. This wasn't just trespassing anymore. It wasn't kids sneaking in for a thrill. This was deliberate, entitled. And they didn't care. They never would. That night, long after the mess was cleaned and the house was silent again, she sat at her kitchen table with the lights off, staring through the window at the pool glimmering under the moonlight. The water looked beautiful, but she no longer saw peace in it. What she saw was a challenge. And sitting there in the dark, her anger hardened into something else. Resolve. She had asked nicely. She had given warnings. She had tried reason. None of it mattered. If they only understood force, then force was what they would get. Her sanctuary had been violated for the last time. Tasha woke up the next morning with a strange stillness inside her, the kind that comes after a storm when the air is sharp and heavy, and you know something has changed forever. The night before, she had cried, quietly, with her face pressed into her hands, the way you cry when anger and helplessness twist together. But this morning there were no tears, only clarity. They thought they could take her home, her pool, her peace, and laugh in her face while doing it. They thought selfish was the right word for a woman who wanted to protect what she had built. No, enough was enough. By the time the sun rose over Chandler, she was already moving, her steps quick, her mind racing. She drove straight to the hardware store, loading her cart with heavy-duty locks, motion-activated sprinklers, and a small set of outdoor cameras. The young cashier gave her a curious look as he scanned the boxes, but she didn't explain. She didn't owe anyone an explanation. Back home, she worked in the rising heat, sweat dripping down her back as she installed the new gate lock, steel, thick, uncuttable. She screwed the cameras into the corners of the house, watching the little red lights blink to life one by one. The sprinklers she set along the fence line, angled just right so anyone trying to climb over would be met with a sudden blast of cold water. But locks and cameras weren't enough. Not for people who didn't fear rules, only humiliation. So she went further. Late that night, when the air had finally cooled, she sat at her laptop and placed a quiet order, a specialty pool dye, harmless but notorious. It was sold with one promise, that if anyone relieved themselves in the water, the liquid would react, spreading in a bright green cloud around them, impossible to hide. She smiled for the first time in days. When the package arrived 3 afternoons later, she carried it into her backyard like it was a treasure chest. The dye shimmered faintly in the bottle, innocent-looking, almost playful. She poured it in carefully, stirring the water with a long-handled net until it disappeared completely. No one could tell by looking. The pool sparkled just as it always had, pure and inviting. But now it was armed with a secret. Next came the sign. She painted the letters herself in bold red strokes. Pool chemically treated. Unauthorized use may cause rash, itching, or skin discoloration. She nailed it to the fence where no one could miss it, Then, for good measure, she dragged an empty chemical box, the kind with scary hazard labels, out by the pump, letting it sit in plain sight. By the time she finished, she stood back and surveyed her work with a sense of satisfaction she hadn't felt in weeks. The cameras blinked, the sprinklers waited, the sign warned, and the pool held its secret like a loaded weapon. 2 days passed in silence. Neighbors who used to walk casually past her fence now paused, reading the sign, whispering among themselves. Teenagers lingered at the corner of her yard, staring at the water but never daring to climb over. One boy muttered something about poisoned pools as he kicked a rock down the street. Even Sandra noticed. Tasha saw her one evening, standing by her driveway, arms crossed, glaring at the warning sign as if it were a personal insult. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, and Sandra's lip curled in disdain before she turned away. Tasha didn't flinch. She let the silence hang, a quiet declaration of war. Inside her house that night, she sat by the window, sipping iced tea as the moonlight shimmered across the pool's surface. It looked as beautiful as ever, calm and blue, but now there was something sharper beneath its stillness. A quiet trap, a lesson waiting to be taught. For the first time in weeks, she felt at peace. Not because the neighbors had stopped, but because she knew, when they came back, and they would finally learn that her sanctuary wasn't theirs to take. And this time, it wouldn't be her on the losing end. The day of reckoning came hotter than most, the kind of sweltering Arizona afternoon that made the sidewalks sizzle and the air itself feel like fire. Tasha had been expecting it. She knew the silence wouldn't last forever. People like Sandra, people who believed they were owed everything, didn't back down out of respect. They tested until they were stopped. She was in her kitchen, slicing lemons for a pitcher of iced tea, when the sound reached her. At first it was faint, laughter, splashes, voices raised in carefree joy. Her grip tightened on the knife. She set it down slowly, heart beating faster, and walked toward the sliding glass door. Her breath caught. There they were. 3 teenagers, bold as ever, had scaled the fence and thrown themselves into her pool. They were diving, splashing, shouting to one another, their carefree arrogance loud enough to rattle her bones. She recognized one of them, the same boy she had caught before, the same boy whose mother had laughed in her face. For a moment, fury surged hot in her veins. She almost stormed outside, ready to scream, ready to drag them out by their ears. But then she stopped. She remembered the cameras blinking above, the sprinklers poised, the sign on the fence, and most importantly, she remembered the die. So instead, she sank into the chair by her window, her iced tea in hand, and waited. It happened faster than she imagined. The boy dove into the deep end, kicking toward the surface. As he came up, a faint green haze spread out around him. At first, the kids didn't notice. They kept laughing, splashing each other. But the green deepened, curling like smoke in the water, winding around their bodies until it was unmistakable. "What the?" One of the girls gasped, staring at her arms. They glowed faintly under the water's surface, tinged with an eerie green light. Within seconds, panic erupted. The boy screamed, thrashing toward the ladder. The second girl scrambled to climb out, slipping on the wet concrete as she shrieked, "It's burning! It's burning!" The dye wasn't burning them. Of course, it was harmless, but fear did the rest. Their imagination turned a prank into terror. They bolted from the pool, dripping, glowing green under the hot sun, their screams carrying across the street. "Help! She poisoned the pool! She poisoned us!" Tasha sat still, calm as stone, watching them flee through the gate, leaving wet footprints glowing faintly behind them. Her cameras captured every second. She didn't smile, didn't cheer. She just sipped her tea, her chest heavy with a strange mix of relief and sadness. Minutes later, the knock came, hard, angry. She opened the door to find Sandra on her porch, face flushed with rage. Behind her, neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering, pointing toward the green-streaked teens who still sobbed at the curb. "You've gone too far this time," Sandra spat. "Chemicals, really? What if they get sick?" Tasha leaned against the doorframe, her expression steady, her voice low and sharp. "What if? What if they respected my property? What if they listened when I asked them to stay out? What if their parents taught them better?" Sandra's mouth opened, ready to fight back, but the crowd behind her was restless now. Some looked angry, but others looked thoughtful, ashamed even. A father muttered under his breath, "They shouldn't have been there." The tide was turning. Tasha didn't argue further. She didn't need to. She let silence do the work, standing tall in her doorway until Sandra finally scoffed, grabbed her daughter, and stormed away. That night, the neighborhood Facebook group buzzed like a hive. posts exploded with accusations, defenses, debates. Some called Tasha cruel, others called her brilliant, but one truth shone through every comment: no one would dare step foot in her pool again. When the noise finally died down, Tasha walked outside and stood by the water. The pool sparkled clean, reflecting the stars. She breathed in the cool night air, feeling the weight she'd carried for weeks. Finals. Alley lift. She knew some neighbors would never forgive her, that Sandra would never look her in the eye again, but she didn't care. She hadn't wanted their friendship. She had wanted respect, and now she had it. She settled into her lounge chair, the night wrapped around her, the pool glimmering like the jewel it was. For the first time in months, she felt it again. Peace. Her sanctuary was hers once more, and this time, everyone knew it.